Welcome to TCS, the TechCentral Show, brought to you by TechCentral. We have a new name for the show. We used to be called TC Daily. We're now TCS, but you can still subscribe to us on YouTube at the same place. And that address, if you don't know it by now, is youtube.com/TechCentral. And you can also get us through any podcasting app, be it Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, or Spotify. Simply search TechCentral, one word in those apps, and hit that subscribe button, and you will always get our shows when we publish them. Now, I'm joined all the way from Stellenbosch, the lucky bugger, by Paul Rowett, who co-founded and is leading a new venture called Toco. Now, Toco has drawn top investors, including the founders of fiber to the home company Vumatel and Michael Jordan, the celebrity venture capitalist and former F&B CEO. You're an illustrious company here, Paul. Welcome to the show. This new venture is all about cryptocurrencies and trying to save the world. Tell us a bit about Toco, how it got started, and who all is involved apart from the names I've just mentioned.
Thanks, Duncan. Good to be here. The names you mentioned are quite accurate. And myself, I'm also, as you mentioned, a co-founder. So Toco is a venture that we've created as a way to make climate change easy, or climate action easy, rather. That every single person, communities around the world can come together around a shared purpose of valuing the action of removing carbon from the atmosphere. We all understand that climate change is a thing, and actually on my shirt I'm wearing the representation of atmospheric carbon concentrations in the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution, we all know that there is a existential problem with an overproduction of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and we can go into the reasons why. But we wanted to focus on solutions. We think that the time for talking is over, and the time for action is now. So we got together, we put our heads together, and we have created a solution that we believe is easy for communities around the world to adopt. And has a chance to create tremendous impact.
Now, Paul, you founded a company called Lobster Inc. I had a look at the website before we started chatting. It looks like it's in sort of content marketing space. Am I describing that correctly? And is that company still going? You're still running that business as well?
No, we exited that business. It was an edtech platform. We focused on hospitality. Yeah, so we trained skills, knowledge, procedure, and sold to, it was a B2B platform, and we sold to businesses in the hospitality sector, from luxury lodges through to big hotel chains around the world, Marriott, IHG, Hilton, etc. We built their content internally, translated it into more than 23 languages, moved to Geneva, had a head office in Geneva, and then eventually sold. We were training about 2 million people around the world in about 23 different languages. And we exited that business about 2.5, 3 years ago with my co-founders. And that's really where the journey into climate and climate tech started.
Right. Well, how did it start? I mean, this is not the usual business venture that people go on. You're starting this business with two guys who are known for fiber to the home initiatives. I know Neil very well. He's in fact, I met with him when he first trenched the first bits of the Vumatel network in Parkhurst. Must have been about 7 or 8 years ago now. And I never sort of pitched Neil in the climate space. How did you guys all get together?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I think after the Lobster Inc. exit, it really piqued my interest in climate change. I wanted to focus on my next kind of chapter being a legacy focus and follow purpose rather than just profitability. I know that Joe and Neil, after they had some time and space to think after their Vumatel exit, I think Joe happened upon this when they were building Vumatel. They had an idea of connecting the solar panels also to the homes because they had ducting under the pavements, and I think that's when he started kind of down the carbon credit kind of side of things, trying to understand the voluntary carbon market and how the mechanics of the voluntary carbon market worked. And then when he had a bit of space and time, I think during lockdown, Joe really kind of put his mind to work at solving this problem. And I met them kind of during that time, and we kind of formulated this idea. But Joe did most of the thinking, as I said, during lockdown, when he had the space and time to really kind of apply his mind, bounced ideas off Neil at the time, got some international economist consultants to look at his paper, and really kind of did the due diligence during that time. And we got introduced through a mutual friend. At the same time, I was kind of on my own climate journey, struggling to understand the incentives around the removal of carbon dioxide. Everybody knows it's a very important activity, but I kept coming back to understanding why people would value it, why people would actually do it when emitting carbon dioxide is often cheaper than not emitting carbon dioxide, and how could we manage to solve this incentive? And at that time, when those questions were going on in my head, after what I had learned in the previous 2 years, is when I met Joe and Neil. And yeah, my first time reading Joe's paper, I think I stayed up till 4 a.m. because I had this kind of eureka moment. It felt to me that Joe had thought through the incentive correctly and had settled on something that did solve it, in my opinion. Yeah. So that's how we met, through a mutual friend.
Okay. So this new digital currency, it's called the Toco, where each unit of this crypto in circulation represents 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent removed from the atmosphere. How does it work exactly? Please take us through, in simple English, assuming I know nothing about blockchain or crypto, exactly how this concept works.
Yeah, so I need to correct your first statement, Duncan. It's not a cryptocurrency.
I've already got it wrong.
And we're quite proud of that fact. So we've worked very hard to keep ourselves out of the cryptocurrency space, and we can go into many reasons for that. And I think maybe let's start there. It's a digital currency that looks and feels more like fiat currency or normal money. And it is not an anonymous, it's not anonymized, and it has a central authority. And I'll go into all the details and specifics around that, but it's not decentralized and it's not anonymous. And we, very importantly, we want to make it a transactional currency. So hence the reason why we're piloting in Stellenbosch. But our aim, our purpose is that this becomes a transactional currency around the world. Why transactional? Because we believe currencies need to have utility. You need to be able to use them to buy your coffee, your lunch, your beers after work, your shopping online, and everything in between. Otherwise, we don't believe that if a currency has no utility, then it's kind of going to be phased out. So how does it work? Very simply put, it's money as tons of carbon stored in a digital wallet on your phone. What that means is that there's 2 entities: the Carbon Reserve, which is a foundation, a not-for-profit foundation based in Geneva, Switzerland, purchases carbon credits, verified carbon credits. We call those carbon mitigation assets. It's proof of carbon that has been removed. So we purchase those, we hold those as assets. We apply a slight risk mitigation factor depending on the type of credit. I can go into more detail around that. But we grade the credits in terms of quality. When I say quality, I mean mitigation value. So has a ton actually been removed? And the proof of that is how we consider value. Generally, the more expensive the credit, the higher the proof, and the better the verification factors are that ton had been removed. We work with third-party verification entities. We buy from their registries, but we operate within the voluntary carbon market and the construct that has been around for over 20 years. So we buy those assets, and then we create currency in the equivalent ratio to the assets that we hold. So each toco in circulation is equivalent to 1 ton of carbon that has been removed from the atmosphere. So as the currency in circulation within communities, so let's take Stellenbosch as an example, because we are proving our concept here. the more currency in circulation and the more individuals that demand to spend in Toco rather than spending in rands places demand on the creation of more Toco. The creation of more Toco can only happen by buying more carbon reduction assets, carbon mitigation assets. This places demand firmly on the activity of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So the activity of spending in the transactional environment, buying coffee, buying your lunch, buying a t-shirt, whatever you're shopping, using Toco places demand on the activity of removing carbon from the atmosphere. And in that way, we enable communities to create change just by harnessing the power of their daily activities.
I think you're going to need to dumb it down for me slightly more, Paul, because I'm not quite sure I'm getting exactly how I, as a consumer who buys this digital currency, am helping the planet. What exactly? Let's say I go onto the app and I purchase 100 Toco and I use those to buy my morning coffee. How am I benefiting the planet in that process?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I'm going to use an example of the general person in South Africa's carbon footprint. So by living in South Africa, on average, it's between 7 and 10 tons that we as individuals, through living our normal daily lives, emit. And if you had to buy your lunch today with 180 Rand, or you could take that 180 Rand and buy one Toco, because that is the exchange rate, and you buy your lunch with one Toco, you've essentially created demand on the removal of 1 ton of carbon. So that's that removal, that proof, and the underlying asset of that could be a forest in Madagascar, it could be removed in South America, it could be removed in South Africa. Any activity that removes carbon dioxide, we will purchase that asset, we will hold that asset as a result of creating that Toco that you've just demanded. By paying for your lunch in Toco, you've essentially created the removal for that ton, and in your term, your 10 tons of carbon a year that you emit, you've essentially removed one of those tons because you've added that Toco into circulation. And if you do that 10 times throughout a month, you could offset your entire year's worth of carbon emissions individually just by buying your lunch for a month, for example. Now, there's a very important message I must say there in terms of offsetting and carbon neutrality. You are creating demand for the removal of carbon dioxide. That asset is held in the carbon reserve, but it is not retired, which is technical speak in the kind of the climate and carbon world. But it is important to kind of call that out while I explain this.
You, as the consumer or the user of Toco, can you determine what initiatives are used to reduce your carbon emissions? Is there that level of granularity available?
No. So the carbon reserve makes those decisions, and the important thing about the carbon portfolio or the CMA portfolio, carbon mitigation asset portfolio, is that it's a range of activities. So there are roughly about 170 different types of carbon credits now, and in the voluntary carbon market, there's about 700 million tons of carbon that goes around the voluntary carbon markets that is traded on an annual basis. And there are varying qualities, varying range of assets from agricultural to geological to technological, ocean-based carbon credits. So it is the carbon reserve's responsibility to purchase the highest quality assets possible at the right price, and to make sure that that mitigation value is of utmost importance. So, while we want to invite citizens of the world to participate in the voluntary carbon market, it is quite a daunting market to understand and kind of purchase the right, knowing what assets to buy, the right kind of assets to buy, is actually quite it's quite a complex field. So we've got experts who work in the carbon reserve who make those decisions by buying the right assets, risk rating them correctly. So we actually hold more assets than Toco in circulation because of that risk mitigation factor. Yeah.
Right. So consumers who are interested in this, I mean, why would a consumer want to use Toco beyond saving the planet? Obviously, there will be many consumers that are interested in doing that because of the benefits you get to the planet. Is there any other particular reason, economic incentive, why I should use Toco?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's many economic incentives why you should use Toco, but I guess the primary purpose here is that you're essentially doing a really good thing. By just going about your daily activities, you're creating demand for significantly more than your carbon footprint. The other economic activities or benefits is saving in Toco is essentially holding a piece of environmental wealth. You are holding tons of carbon on your personal balance sheet. Companies can also hold tons of carbon on their balance sheets and hold it as a current asset, potentially against emissions that they are emitting through their business activities and daily lives. But it also could be an investment. As we will see in our future, I guess the demand for carbon removal, we could see that increasing as we continue to emit and temperatures continue to rise. The demand for the activity of removing carbon dioxide, we could see a case for that demand increasing. So by holding Toco, you could potentially see a gain in the price of Toco, but it's a currency, so that the exchange rate will go up and down with supply and demand changes, I guess. I guess it's difficult to comment on the inflationary benefits with holding Toco versus some of the other currencies because it's we still are at the start of our journey, but we do see it as a kind of an anti-inflationary move.
Okay, I was going to ask how the foreign exchange rate is determined for Toco. You say it's a free floating currency and its price will be determined by its users.
Yeah, well, the price is determined by the cost of the underlying asset. So the assets we purchase and the risk rating that we apply does affect that's the majority driver of the price of Toco. One thing to understand is the purpose of Toco is to expand the voluntary carbon market and expand the activity of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Ultimately, if we increase the demand side of that marketplace, we could see a case where, or we expect to see a case where the price of a carbon credit starts to increase. That will mean that there will be more market participants coming into the voluntary carbon market and expanding that marketplace. Ultimately, we would love to see a gold rush on removing carbon from the atmosphere, where mining the atmosphere becomes a very valuable activity. If we think about normal currency being backed by gold and the demand that we saw on that in gold mining, and then a more recent example like Bitcoin, the mining a cryptographic code to extract value, where your elements of scarcity is computing power and electricity. Instead of proof of work being the thing that creates the value, we would love to see a world where proof of carbon is the thing that creates the value, because then we're pointing huge humanity's energy and innovation and investment in the right area, which is ultimately the reduction of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and ultimately the underlying asset of that is normally the natural world, natural resources.
So there's no proof of work Bitcoin style mining going on with your digital currency? No.
The only the proof is the proof of carbon removed from the atmosphere. So that also is a good way to think about it. In the Bitcoin world, you would need proof of work, you need the cryptographic code to be mined, et cetera. But to create a toco, you need to mine the atmosphere. You need to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Now, as an example, farmers, can change their farming practices. They can embrace soil carbon sequestration through regenerative agriculture. But that takes time, investment, planning, change in strategy. And ultimately, at a price of between $5 to $8 to $10 a ton, depending on the quality, a ton of carbon removed, that isn't always enough, to make that investment necessary. But as that price starts to increase according to the demand, you could see a world where more and more farmers start to embrace it because it's now a financially viable thing to do. I mentioned earlier around the incentive, and I guess this speaks to the heart of what Toco is about, is trying to create an economically viable and valuable activity out of the removal of carbon dioxide, because you can sell it on a marketplace where the price is rising. And if you can do that, if carbon dioxide had this utility, had this use case, and was a valuable activity to mine it and a valuable commodity to sell, then you could see, huge, large scale reductions of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Okay. How do you determine how many tocos are out there? Bitcoin is limited to 21 million Bitcoins, I think it is, that will ever be mined. Are there similar limitations on Toco?
No, there's no limitations on Toco. The more tocos demanded, the more we'll have to go and create them, and I've explained the mechanism of creating the currency. The communities, we hope, will embrace Toco. Companies will embrace the concept of Toco. And if we see this huge spike in adoption, the challenge we see and the challenge we foresee is the supply in the voluntary carbon market. So we'll need to expand that very quickly. To put that in perspective, so the limitation and the element of scarcity that I think you're referring to there is the cost of mining carbon from the atmosphere, the cost of removal, the process of that, the planning, the strategy, the R&D, and ensuring that is measured and verified correctly. There's all costs, and that all takes time and investment. So there is that level of expense and investment and element of scarcity. We often talk about carbon dioxide as having actually very similar properties to gold. It's expensive to mine. It's relatively scarce. It is divisible, and it has little other use case outside of the base for money. It's seen as with gold, it's soft and malleable. It was never used for weapons or industry, and it's gold was used as a signal of wealth. You had excess money, so you could display it on your person. Whereas CO2 is more of a virtue signal. I care for the environment, I care for the future, therefore I am going to reduce my carbon footprint and my communities and my countries, or my companies. So there is that element of pride of taking care of the future of the planet.
Take me through the business model here. I see there's a 1% transaction fee on all transactions. Is that how this business makes money? Are there other revenue opportunities?
Correct. Yeah, the 1% transaction fee, and that's built into the payment network. The payment platform is built off a blockchain, but we built our own blockchain to ensure that we could control the proof of identity and the individual's KYC, know your customer. So we built that into the blockchain. We also built some anti-money laundering (AML) protocols into the blockchain, so it's incredibly safe. I also mentioned the centralized nature of the carbon reserve, so that identifies it as not a cryptocurrency and behaves more like a fiat currency. But yes, the business model is relatively simple. It's a 1% transaction fee levied on the sender. So the sender of the currency makes use of the service of exchange, and therefore pays a 1% payment fee.
Okay. And so you're rolling this out in Stellenbosch. Have you contracted yet with merchants? Can I actually go into a coffee shop, for example, in Stellenbosch today and spend Toco?
Absolutely, Duncan. In fact, you can. We're very proud of the fact that you can spend a couple of days just spending in Toco. You can have a coffee, you can go for breakfast, you can go shopping, you can buy yourself some nice new clothes. You can go for a haircut if you like. I can see you probably don't need that right now. You can stay in a hotel. You can go out to a wine farm. You can go for a beer after work. You can go out for a lovely dinner. You can choose between an array of restaurants, and you can do that all in Toco. So yeah, our aim is to get every merchant in Stellenbosch accepting Toco. And the reason why we really kind of hyper focused on one town is that we want it to be everywhere. We're signing on users at the moment, and the response has been quite phenomenal in terms of people adopting it, merchants adopting it, and everybody's talking about it. I think it's been a good decision to launch in Stellenbosch, besides the fact that it's great to be here and it's in our backyard. So you're welcome to come down and spend your whole day or 2 days in Toco.
I might do that at some
could be
point.
quite fun.
It's about time I came down for a visit to Stellenbosch, actually. What's the regulatory side of this? Do you have to get licenses from the FSCA and other regulatory bodies? How is a business like Toco regulated in South Africa?
Yeah, that's a great question. We spent the better part of kind of 6 months last year investigating that. Important to know that Toco is registered out of Switzerland. So we're governed by a lot of the Swiss regulations when it comes to how the payment network is administered. And the reason why we chose Switzerland is because they've got very defined, relatively advanced legislation on operating a blockchain payments network, and very clear specified ways in which you're doing it. And the Swiss obviously are also very thorough in their approach. So the challenge was mirroring those regulations which we were complying with the local regulations. South Africa's regulations are still in the state of development and are being advanced at the moment. Late last year, we were kind of given the guidance that we must become an FSP, and that will be happening in June this year. There's the application process open, so we will certainly comply with that. It's important to mention that we spent a lot of time with the compliance committee in Standard Bank, and we're proud to say that we partnered with Standard Bank. So when there is a transaction with Toco, when you're exchanging rands to Toco, it's a bank-to-bank transaction, which is quite important, as I think most people, when they think digital currency, they think cryptocurrency, some far removed, distant location. But we're very proud of the fact that we partnered with South Africa's oldest bank with such a kind of innovative solution, and also using another thing that we're proud of in terms of innovation is having this blockchain payment network integrated with the traditional finance world. We believe that the technology suite of blockchain it's a phenomenal technology, but the application of cryptocurrency, it's going to be difficult for that to be integrated into the traditional banking sector because there's no KYC and it's anonymous and decentralized. So we believe that blockchain technology exists, but we're just changing the application so that it's safer. It lives within the traditional banking sector and has safety and security of the Toco community at heart, and as number one priority.
I know that Bitcoin and similar cryptocurrencies were developed originally as transactional currencies. I know this isn't being pitched as a crypto; it's a digital currency. But you want this to be a transactional currency. You want people to spend tokens in coffee shops or wherever they happen to be. But in the cryptocurrency space, we've seen a lot of cryptos becoming investment vehicles. People put money into Bitcoin as a hedge against the rand, for example, or they just expect the value of Bitcoin to increase over time. So they're not using it as a transactional currency. Do you expect that some people will invest in Toco as an investment rather than as an e-wallet or a means of spending that money? And if they do that, is that a problem, or would you welcome investors in the currency?
Absolutely. Look, if you hold Toco, you're holding a piece of environmental wealth, as we say. You're holding tons of carbon, and that can never be a bad thing. I think the reason why some of the cryptocurrencies are more attractive investment vehicles is because there's volatility, and if you trade that volatility smartly, you can make a huge amount of money. I don't believe we'll see that level of volatility within Toco because it's a centralized. There's a centralized authority, the Carbon Reserve, that will be buying assets to make sure that the price is maintained. And because of this underlying asset, we don't see huge volatility spikes. So, at the moment, we're still early days. So, we're not seeing huge demand just yet. But as soon as we launch with banks as market makers, which we plan to do later this year, and have Toco on their exchanges, we'll open it up to much bigger demand signals and demand swings. So at that time, maybe that's the thing. But to answer your first question, would we be happy if people invested in? Absolutely. Any demand placed on Toco places demand on the activity of removing carbon from the atmosphere. So it can't be a bad thing.
Okay. Now I'm in Joburg. Can I buy Toco right now, or do I need to be a resident of Stellenbosch?
Absolutely, Duncan. You can log on to your app store. You can download Tocos, TOCOS, load the wallet, go through the security steps. You'll need to do KYC, so you'll need your ID and proof of address. Buy Toco to offset against your footprint. You can hold it for the moment, but then the next time you're in Stellenbosch, you can come and buy coffee and lunch and use it as a transactional currency. We will be expanding into South Africa second half of this year, and globally as well. So this is a global initiative, and we're just kind of testing and iterating in Stellenbosch. But we foresee after June to be launching in the rest of South Africa and globally. Probably San Francisco.
Sorry, Paul. When you launch globally, will you launch the whole world at once, or will you go after targeted markets?
It's a very interesting question. I think the strategy of launching in one town works quite nicely because you get that velocity of money. You have lots of consumers and lots of merchants, and there's lots of utility to use the money. Like every store you go into, you see Toco around, so it becomes a kind of an easier habitual thing to do. But the strategy for launching globally is actually to turn it over to communities and say, here's a platform where you can enable climate action. Go and run it yourselves. So if somebody in Johannesburg feels passionate and strongly about climate change, they can. We'll give them the tools and abilities to launch it in their own communities, whenever and wherever they want.
Just take me through the process of spending Toco. I keep mentioning a coffee shop, so let's continue with that analogy. I've had my coffee and I'm now ready to pay. What do I do? Do I open up the Toco app and scan something, or how does it work exactly?
Yeah, we've tried to make it as simple as possible. So you open up the Toco app, you scan a QR code. It's a circular QR code that's standing on the counter normally, or on the till slip, or in the bill folder. So we're experimenting with new ways of that payment interface, but at the moment it's a QR code payment system.
Okay.
So it works like any of the other digital wallet QR code payment systems. Importantly, though, the Toco is the payment network that actually sits behind the digital wallet. We launched the digital wallet in Stellenbosch to test and trial and see how people use it. But I think the long-term strategy is to link in with all the other digital wallets so that you can pay in Toco on any digital wallet, Apple Pay or any of the other digital wallets that people choose.
And when you make a payment, this is all happening in real time on the blockchain that you built.
Correct. So each block, the blockchain produces a block in about 6 seconds. So average time for a transaction is 6 seconds, and that's whether you are, whether you're doing it here or any location. So around 6 seconds, and the blockchain can facilitate about 2,000 transactions a second.
2,000 a second. Wow. Okay. And can scale, I presume. You have the ability to scale it as you need to as the system grows.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we kind of thought about and built scale into the original architecture of how we put the blockchain together. And it scales really nicely. From a couple of the decisions that we made early on, we can see it's moving up to, it's 2,000 transactions a second at the moment. Obviously that kind of demand will take a while to come to fruition. But we wanted to make sure that when we do scale, that the ability in the architecture is there.
And then the 1% fee, I know you mentioned this, but who pays that fee again? Is it the merchant or the consumer?
So the consumer pays a 1% fee, and merchants pay a 0% transaction fee, which is quite unique in terms of payment systems, because a lot of the other payment systems or payment rails, there's about 2.5% to 3% on average. So we've seen a good response from merchants, and we want to try and encourage consumers to support merchants who are kind of enabling this network. But merchants are responding really nicely to the 0% transaction fee. And obviously once they become a sender, then they pay the 1% transaction fee.
Yeah. So was that a deliberate strategy to get merchants hyped up about using this platform? Because at the moment they're paying, as you said, 3.5% credit card fees to the banks, for example, for fiat currency transactions. Was it a deliberate strategy to get the merchants excited about an alternative?
Also, that we didn't necessarily see charging merchants more as a strategy for growth. Yes, so we wanted to get them excited. We wanted to get them on board. So we did create a system that facilitated a slightly easier conversation, for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Where does the name Toco come from?
Ton of carbon offset. So the molecular structure of carbon dioxide is C with 2 O's, 1 carbon, 2 oxygens. So ton is the lowercase metric symbol for 1 metric ton. So ton of carbon offset, and TOCO. Yeah. So that's where the name comes from. Ton of carbon offset.
Okay. Great. And then lastly, Paul, how do I access? You mentioned the apps. You can search in the App Store. It's iPhone and Android, right?
Correct. Yeah. So just search TOCOS. Yeah. So, and download the wallet. You can register. We need your email address, and then go through the security protocols. There's a 12-word security phrase, which importantly each consumer needs to store in a very safe place. And that is your access to your wallet. So nobody else has access to that. If that's lost, then that money you need to keep that to access that. It's not like one of these custodial platforms that we keep a version of your codes. It's important that each individual holds access to their wallet themselves. And then there's, as I said, ID, proof of address. You log on and then you buy tocos with any credit card or any debit card. And you do that through the application. And again, just importantly, that's a bank-to-bank transaction.
So just to understand that, Paul, what you're saying now is you're keeping, as the consumer, as the user of the service who has purchased Toco, you're keeping the cryptographic keys. Am I expressing that correctly, in your wallet?
Yes.
And you don't keep security cryptographic keys like an exchange would, like a crypto exchange would. So it's up to you as the individual to take responsibility for securing your own wallet.
100%. It's security in your own hands, which we believe also is something that differentiates us from a crypto or an exchange, is that you are in control of your money and your tocos.
And can you buy tocos only through the apps, or do you need to? Can you do it through the web as well? Do you have a website where people can interact and transact?
Yep, absolutely. You can download you can log on the web browser. It's tocos.org, and you can sign up there. You can log on to the web browser, and if you're interested in it, you can leave it. And we're not in your area at the moment. You can buy tocos within South Africa. So outside South Africa, if you're not on the South African App Store, we're not there yet. So you can leave us a note, tell us you're interested, and we'll get to your region or area as soon as we can. But at the moment, anyone in South Africa can download tocos and tocos wallet and buy and hold tocos. Yeah.
And do you expect at some point? I know that you've said this is not a cryptocurrency, but do you expect at some point that tocos will be tradable on cryptocurrency exchanges?
No, I don't think so. I think the strategy that we are moving towards is certainly away from crypto space, more to be function more like a fiat currency. So we would prefer to be traded on banks exchanges with other forex trades. So that's where we're aiming towards. Yeah. So to be part of the kind of traditional institutional financial sector with all the other currencies.
Great. Well, it sounds like a great initiative. I'm going to go and buy a few tocos now and check it out. Paul Rowett is CEO of Toco. Thanks so much for taking the time, and best of luck with the new venture.
Thanks so much, Duncan. I appreciate your time.